Graves stood in the diplomatic chamber with her hands folded behind her back and her face as calm as stone. She had practiced this expression in the mirror for 20 years. Every human diplomat learned it. The galaxy demanded that humans smile while being humiliated, and had become very good at smiling. The ambassador was a tall reptilian creature with scales the color of dried blood. His name was, and he had spent the last hour explaining why the treaty between their species meant nothing. His teeth were yellow and sharp, and he showed them often when he laughed. Commander Cole stood 3 steps behind. He was not a diplomat. He was a soldier, and soldiers were not supposed to show emotion either. But's jaw hurt from clenching it so hard. He watched pick up the treaty document that had taken 3 years to negotiate. He watched the ambassador spit on it. He watched throw it on the floor and grind it under his clawed foot. Did not move, she did not speak, she simply waited. This was humanity's way. It had been humanity's way for 300 years, ever since the first human ships had ventured beyond their small solar system and discovered they were not alone. The galaxy was old and full of ancient civilizations who had been traveling between stars while humans were still living in caves. Humanity arrived late to a party that had been going on for millions of years, and the other guests were not happy to see them. They were one of 12 major powers in the Galactic Assembly. They controlled over 200 star systems and had a fleet of warships that could darken the skies of any world. Humanity controlled 17 systems and had a defensive fleet that everyone considered laughable. The math was simple. Humanity could not afford to make enemies. So they made friends instead, or they tried to. They offered trade agreements and cultural exchanges and scientific cooperation. They were polite to species who called them vermin. They smiled at ambassadors who threatened their colonies. They signed treaties that everyone knew would be broken, because a broken treaty was better than a war they could not win. Had joined the diplomatic corps because he believed in this mission. He believed that patience would eventually earn humanity a place at the galactic table. But standing in this chamber, watching laugh at everything humanity had worked for, felt that belief starting to crack. The ambassador finished his performance and waved a clawed hand at. He told her to go home and tell her leaders that they would take what they wanted when they wanted it. He said humans were useful as workers and nothing more. He said the galaxy would be better if humans simply accepted their place at the bottom. Thanked him for his time. Her voice was steady and warm, as if he had just complimented her dress. She gathered the ruined treaty from the floor, folded it carefully, and placed it in her briefcase. Then she bowed slightly and walked out of the chamber with following behind her. They did not speak until they reached the human shuttle. The door closed behind them and finally let her mask fall. Had never seen her look so tired. There were lines on her face that had not been there a year ago. Her eyes were red, and he realized she was fighting back tears. She told that she had been doing this job for 22 years. She had been insulted by every major species in the galaxy. She had watched humans be cheated and exploited and murdered, and she had always believed that patience was the answer. She had always believed that if humanity just held on long enough, things would change. Asked her if she still believed that. Did not answer. She just stared out the window at the station growing smaller behind them. The shuttle was halfway back to the Endeavor when the message came through. Read it first, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. He handed the tablet to without saying a word. Harvest IV was a human agricultural colony on the edge of space. It was home to 12,000 people, most of them farmers and their families. It was a peaceful place with golden fields and small towns and children who played in the sunshine without fear. They had destroyed it. Their warships had appeared without warning and burned everything to ash. The message included images that wished he had never seen. Homes turned to craters, bodies in the streets, a school that was nothing but blackened rubble. The official statement called it a necessary security action. They claimed the colony had been harboring terrorists. Everyone knew it was a lie. Harvest IV had been targeted because it was undefended and because they wanted to send a message. The message was simple: humans did not matter. Read the report 3 times. Her hands were shaking, but her face had gone very still. It was not the diplomatic mask knew so well. This was something else, something colder. The Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session to address the attack. Humanity's representative pleaded for justice. He showed the images of dead children and burning homes. He asked for sanctions, for condemnation, for anything that might hold the accountable. The Assembly ruled it an internal matter. They expressed mild concern and suggested that humanity file a formal protest. Then they moved on to discuss trade regulations. Was in his quarters when he heard the news. He put his fist through the wall and broke 2 fingers. The ship's doctor set them in silence because there was nothing to say. Called a meeting of her senior staff that night. She stood at the head of the table with the ruined treaty in front of her. She told them that she had spent her entire career believing in peace. She told them that she had sacrificed everything for the dream of a galaxy where humanity could live without fear. Then she told them that some dreams had to die so that people could live. She was going back to Earth. She was going to speak to the United Human Council, and she was going to ask them a question that no human had dared to ask in 300 years. Asked her what question? Looked at him with eyes that held no more tears. She said she was going to ask them if it was time to stop being patient. She was going to ask them if humanity was finally ready to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Thought about the dead children on Harvest IV. He thought about 3 centuries of insults and broken promises and murdered innocents. He thought about his cracked fingers and his aching jaw and his dying faith in diplomacy. He told that he would like to come with her. She nodded, and together they began the long journey home. Earth looked smaller from orbit than remembered. She had been away for 6 years, moving between stations and ships and alien worlds, always speaking soft words to creatures who despised her. Now she was home, and the blue and green planet below seemed fragile in a way that made her chest hurt. Stood beside her as the shuttle descended through clouds and sunlight. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said during the long journey from space. They both knew what was about to do. They both knew there would be no going back. The United Human Council met in Geneva, in a building that had once been a palace. Walked through hallways lined with portraits of diplomats and peacemakers, men and women who had dedicated their lives to the belief that words were stronger than weapons. She wondered what they would think of what she was about to propose. The council chamber was circular, with seats arranged in rising tiers around a central platform. 200 representatives from every human colony and territory filled those seats. They fell silent when entered. Council speaker sat in the highest chair. She was 87 years old, with white hair and hands that trembled slightly when she moved them. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and they fixed on with an intensity that made younger people nervous. Had lost her son to raiders 30 years ago. His ship had been attacked in neutral space, and the Galactic Assembly had called it an unfortunate accident. Had smiled and accepted their condolences and continued to advocate for peaceful coexistence, but knew that had never forgotten. None of them had ever forgotten. Took her place on the central platform and began to speak. She told them about the treaty negotiations with the. She told them about his insults and his laughter and his absolute certainty that humans would do nothing. She told them about Harvest IV. The chamber was silent. Some representatives wept openly. Others stared at the images projected with faces made of stone. Everyone knew about Harvest IV. But seeing it again, hearing describe the children who had died in the flames, made it real in a way that news reports could not. Then told them about the remembrance. Every human diplomat was trained to maintain a personal archive of every insult, every broken treaty, every injustice they witnessed. These archives were combined into a single database that stretched back 300 years. It contained the names of every human who had been murdered by alien hands. It contained recordings of every mocking laugh and contemptuous sneer. It contained 3 centuries of pain, carefully organized and preserved. The remembrance was humanity's memory, and humanity had a very long memory. Asked the council a simple question. She asked them if it was time. Rose slowly from her chair. The chamber held its breath, had been a voice for peace her entire career. She had argued against military buildup and in favor of diplomatic solutions even when others called her naive. Her opinion carried more weight than anyone else's. Looked at for a long moment. Then she looked at the image still glowing on the display, the image of a burned school on a world called Harvest IV. She said one word, yes. The vote was unanimous. Was reassigned that same day. A shuttle took him to coordinates that did not exist on any public map. He traveled for 3 days through empty space until he reached a station hidden in the shadow of a dead moon. The station was called Threshold, and it was humanity's greatest secret. Admiral Dawson met at the airlock. He was a tall man with gray hair and scars on his face that he never explained. He shook his hand and welcomed him to the real human military. What saw inside Threshold made him forget how to speak. The station was enormous, stretching for kilometers in every direction. Hangars held warships that made vessels look like toys. Laboratories hummed with technologies that should not have existed. Training facilities echoed with the footsteps of soldiers who had spent their entire lives preparing for a war that might never come. Admiral Dawson explained everything as they walked. While humanity played the victim, they had been building. Every trade agreement, every scientific exchange, every diplomatic mission had been an opportunity to learn. Humans had studied alien technology and then improved it. They had mapped weaknesses that no other species knew existed. They had developed weapons that could end civilizations. Asked why? Why build all this if they never intended to use it? The admiral smiled sadly. He said they always hoped they would never have to use it. He said humanity had chosen peace because peace was better. But they had also prepared for the day when peace was no longer possible. That day had arrived. The admiral briefed on Operation Silence. It was not a war plan. Wars were messy and long and killed millions of people on both sides. Operation Silence was something else entirely. It was a demonstration. Humanity was not going to fight They were not going to trade planets and count casualties and negotiate ceasefires. They were going to show exactly what they were capable of. They were going to make the understand that every moment of their existence had been permitted by human mercy. And then they were going to let the choose. Spent weeks at Threshold, learning the true extent of human capabilities. He trained with soldiers who could move through walls and pilots who flew ships that bent space around them. He studied weapons that could crack planets and devices that could erase entire computer networks in seconds. He also learned about the human operatives who had been living among alien species for generations. They looked alien because they had been surgically modified. They spoke alien languages because they had been trained from birth. They had been watching and waiting and reporting back for 300 years. The galaxy had no idea how deeply humanity had penetrated their civilizations. Thought about all the aliens who had laughed at human weakness. He thought about all the diplomats who had smiled while being humiliated. He thought about 3 centuries of patience and planning and quiet preparation. Then he thought about Harvest IV, and he stopped feeling sorry for what was about to happen. Arrived at Threshold on the eve of the operation, she looked different now. The diplomatic mask was gone, replaced by something harder and sharper. She was no longer an ambassador. She was a weapon. She found in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She told him that she had spent her whole life believing that violence was never the answer. She told him that she still believed it in a way. Violence was not the answer, but sometimes it was the only question that mattered. Asked her if she was ready. Looked at the stars that had never belonged to humanity, the stars that older species had claimed while humans were still learning to make fire. She said she had been ready for 300 years. The was called, and it burned with celebration. The destruction of Harvest IV had been declared a great victory, and the Emperor had ordered 3 days of feasting to honor the warriors who had carried it out. Emperor sat on a throne made from the bones of conquered enemies. He was old for nearly 200 years, and his scales had faded to a dull gray. But his eyes were still cruel, and his claws were still sharp, and his empire still stretched across 200 star systems. Around him, advisors and generals feasted on the finest foods their world could offer. Musicians played victory songs that had been sung for 10,000 years. Dancers moved through the throne room like flames, their scales painted in the colors of war. The ambassador who had humiliated Graves stood at the emperor's side. He was telling the story of how he had spat on the human treaty, and everyone laughed. He described the look on the human ambassador's face, the way she had simply accepted his contempt without a word of protest. The laughter grew louder. Said that humans were cattle. He said they existed only to serve superior species. He said the galaxy would be a better place once humanity learned its proper place beneath boots. The Emperor smiled and raised his glass to toast the cowardice of humans. Then the lights went out. Not just in the throne room, across the entire palace, across the capital city, across every city on every continent the music stopped, the dancers froze, the laughter died in 10 million throats. Every ship in orbit went dark, navigation systems failed, weapons systems locked, communication arrays fell silent. The mighty fleet that had terrorized human colonies for centuries became nothing more than metal drifting in the void. Emperor shouted for his guards. No one answered. The emergency systems that should have activated did not respond. The backup generators that had never failed in 10,000 years refused to turn on. For 3 hours, the Empire sat in perfect darkness. Some tried to flee. They stumbled through black hallways and crashed into walls and fell down stairs they could not see. Some prayed to gods they had ignored for generations. Some simply sat and waited, their cruel hearts filling with a terror they had never known. When the lights returned, there was a human standing in the Emperor's throne room. Graves stood alone in the center of the chamber. She wore no armor and carried no weapons. She was surrounded by thousands of warriors who could have torn her apart in seconds, and she was smiling. The Emperor screamed for his guards to kill her. They rushed forward with blades drawn and claws extended, did not move. The guards stopped 3 steps away from her. They could not go further. Something invisible held them in place, something that made their muscles lock and their weapons fall from trembling hands. Spoken perfect. She had learned the language decades ago when she first became a diplomat. She had wanted to understand the people she was trying to make peace with. Now she used that understanding for a different purpose. She told the Emperor that she had come to deliver a message. She told him that humanity had received his message at Harvest IV, 12,000 innocent lives burned to ash. Now it was time for him to receive a message in return. Raised her hand and a holographic display appeared in the air before her. It showed images that made even the look away. Recordings of every atrocity their species had committed against humanity. Broken treaties, murdered civilians, enslaved workers, children crying for parents who would never come. The recording played for 1 hour. No one spoke. No one moved. The Emperor sat on his throne of bones and watched 300 years of cruelty reflected back at him. When the recording ended, lowered her hand. The display vanished. She told the Emperor what humanity could do, not what they would do, what they could do. She told him that human ships had been orbiting for decades, undetected by any sensor. She told him that human operatives walked among his people, had always walked among his people, watching and waiting. She told him that the weapons pointed at his planet at this very moment could crack it open like an egg and scatter its remains across the void. The Emperor tried to speak. His voice came out as a whisper. Continued. She told him that humanity had chosen peace for 300 years, not because they were weak, not because they were afraid, because they believed that peace was better than war, because they hoped that patience would eventually be rewarded with understanding. But patience had limits, and Harvest IV had reached those limits. Offered the Emperor a choice. He could make amends for what his people had done. He could pay reparations to the families of the dead. He could sign treaties that would actually be honored. He could allow human observers on worlds to ensure that no more atrocities occurred. Or he could refuse, and if he refused, there would become a lesson for every other species in the galaxy. A lesson about what happened when humanity's tolerance finally ran out. The Emperor found his voice. He called a liar. He said humanity did not have the power she claimed. He said no species could hide such capabilities for 300 years. Smiled again. She asked him if he would like a demonstration. She raised her hand, and on the far side of a mountain vanished. It was there one moment and gone the next. A perfect circle of emptiness where stone and snow had stood for millions of years. The Emperor stared at the display showing the missing mountain. His advisors fell to their knees. The ambassador who had laughed at human weakness made a sound like a dying animal. Asked the Emperor for his decision. He should have surrendered. Any reasonable leader would have surrendered. But Emperor had ruled through fear for 200 years, and he could not imagine bowing to a species he had always considered beneath contempt. He told that they would never submit to human cattle. He told her that his fleets would hunt down every human world and burn them all. He told her that he would personally eat her heart while her people watched. Smile faded. For a moment she looked almost sad. She told the Emperor that she had hoped he would choose differently. She told him that humanity had never wanted this. They had simply wanted to be left in peace, to build their colonies and raise their children and explore the stars without fear. But some lessons could only be taught through consequences. Vanished. One moment she was there and the next she was gone, transported back to a ship that they could not see or detect. The Emperor screamed orders at his advisors: mobilize the fleets, contact the other powers, form alliances against the human threat. His advisors tried to obey, but the communication systems were still disrupted, the fleets were still dark, and somewhere in the void above, human ships were beginning to move. The lesson was about to begin. The Empire had taken 10,000 years to build. It fell in 7 hours. Cole commanded a ground team that landed on as the operation began. His soldiers moved through cities that had lost all power, past who stood frozen in the streets, unable to understand what was happening to their world. There was no fighting. That was the strangest part. Had prepared for battle, for blood and chaos and the ugly mathematics of war. Instead, he found silence. Human ships appeared above every major world at the same moment. They in perfect synchronization, thousands of vessels that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. They looked up and saw death written across their skis. But the death never came, not the kind they expected. Instead of bombs, the human ships released transport beams. Instead of soldiers, they sent administrators and engineers and medical teams. They were not killed, they were relocated. Watched as entire city populations were moved to transport vessels in a matter of minutes. Families were kept together. The sick were given medical care. The elderly were treated with gentleness that confused them deeply. Humans did not act like conquerors. They acted like movers helping someone change homes. The destinations were barren moons scattered across 100 systems. Each moon had been prepared in advance with basic shelters, food supplies, and water recyclers. They would survive. They would have everything they needed to live. But they would have nothing else. Their ships were taken. Their weapons were confiscated. Their computer systems were wiped clean. Every record of their history, every archive of their conquests, every monument to their glory was reduced to dust. They found themselves scattered across the galaxy with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the memories in their heads. His team was assigned to secure the Imperial archives. He led his soldiers through corridors that had once echoed with the footsteps of conquerors. Now they were empty and silent, lit only by the emergency lights that human engineers had activated. The archives were vast. They contained 10,000 years of history, records of every species they had conquered and every world they had claimed, stood before databases that held the names of millions of slaves and the coordinates of hundreds of destroyed civilizations. He gave the order to wipe it all. His soldiers hesitated. One of them, a young woman named, asked if they were sure. She said that destroying history was wrong, even the history of monsters. She said that future generations should know what they had done. Thought about it. He thought about Harvest IV and the 12,000 people who had been erased from existence. He thought about the celebrations and the laughter and the absolute certainty that humans would never fight back. Then he told that the galaxy would know what they had done. Humanity would make sure of it, but they themselves did not deserve to keep the trophies of their cruelty. They did not deserve to look back on their conquests with pride. They deserved to start over with nothing, the same way their victims had been forced to start over with nothing. Nodded and activated the deletion sequence. Across the galaxy, other species watched in horror. The who had raided human ships for centuries suddenly found reasons to patrol their borders more carefully. The collective, who had cheated humans in every trade agreement, began reviewing their policies. The Dominion, who had laughed at human weakness in every diplomatic meeting, stopped laughing. No one had known. That was the terrifying part. For 300 years, humanity had smiled and nodded and accepted every insult. For 300 years, they had seemed like the perfect victims, and the whole time, they had been building weapons that could unmake civilizations. The Galactic Assembly called an emergency session. Representatives from every major power demanded answers. They demanded to know how humanity had hidden such capabilities. They demanded to know what humanity planned to do next. Graves appeared before them via holographic transmission. She stood alone on a platform, facing hundreds of alien faces twisted with fear and anger. She did not apologize, she did not threaten, she simply explained. She told them that humanity had wanted peace. She told them that every broken treaty, every murdered civilian, every laughing insult had been and remembered. She told them that humans had built their secret military not to conquer, but to ensure that one day they would have the option to defend themselves. She told them that they had been given chances. Every species had been given chances. Humanity had asked politely for respect. They had pleaded for fair treatment. They had accepted humiliation after humiliation, hoping that patience would eventually be rewarded. But patience was not weakness. It was a gift, and they had refused that gift when they burned Harvest IV. Told the assembly that humanity did not want war. They did not want conquest. They wanted only to be treated as equals, to raise their children in safety, to explore the stars without fear. The choice was simple. The other species could accept humanity as partners. They could honor their treaties and respect human lives and work together toward a future that benefited everyone. Or they could continue as before. And if they continued as before, they would share the fate of the... The transmission ended. The assembly sat in silence. Finished his work on and returned to his ship. The planet below was empty now, stripped of its population and its history and everything that had made it the heart of an empire. It would remain empty, a monument to what happened when cruelty met consequences. he found in the observation deck, staring down at the world they had unmade. He asked her if she was satisfied. She told him that satisfaction was not the right word. She told him that she had spent her whole career trying to avoid this moment, hoping that words would be enough. She had failed, and millions of were now scattered across the galaxy because of that failure. Said that it was not her failure. He said they had made their choice when they burned Harvest IV. Nodded slowly. She said he was right, but she also said that being right did not make her feel better. It did not bring back the dead children or heal the wounds that 3 centuries of patience had inflicted on the human spirit. She told that they had proven something today. They had proven that humanity was capable of terrible things, and now they would have to live with that knowledge forever. Looked at the empty planet below. He thought about the scattered across 100 moons, struggling to survive without the empire that had defined them for 10,000 years. He told that living with knowledge was better than dying without it. She did not answer. They stood together in silence, watching the stars that finally, after 300 years, might be willing to make room for humanity. 10 years had passed since the fall of the empire. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one had expected. Cole walked through a field of golden wheat on a world that had once been called Harvest IV. The colony had been rebuilt. New families lived in new homes, and children played in the sunshine without fear. A memorial stood at the center of the main settlement, a simple stone wall engraved with 12,000 names. His daughter Emma walked beside him. She was 8 years old, with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She had been born after the war, in a galaxy that treated humanity differently than it had before. Emma asked her father why they had come to this place. She knew the history. Every human child learned about Harvest IV and what had followed, but knowing history and understanding it were different things. Knelt beside her and pointed at the memorial. He told her that bad people had hurt the humans who lived here. He told her that humanity had asked the galaxy to punish those bad people, and the galaxy had refused. Emma asked what happened next. Told her that humanity had punished them instead. He told her that sometimes, when no one else would protect you, you had to protect yourself. He told her that it was sad and terrible and necessary all at once. Emma thought about this for a while. Then she asked why humanity had waited so long. She asked why they had let themselves be hurt for 300 years before fighting back. Sat down in the grass and pulled his daughter into his lap. He told her that fighting changed you. He told her that once you showed the universe what you were capable of, you could never go back to who you were before. He told her that humanity had waited because they were afraid. Not afraid of the other species, afraid of themselves, afraid of what 300 years of bottled rage might look like when it was finally released. Emma asked if they were still afraid. Looked at the golden wheat swaying in the breeze and the children playing near the memorial. He told her that they would always be a little afraid, and that was probably a good thing. Across the galaxy, they were slowly rebuilding. Their scattered populations had begun to reconnect on the barren moons that humanity had assigned them. They grew food and built shelters and tried to remember what it meant to be a people without an empire. Some species had reached out to help them. The collective sent agricultural experts to improve their crop yields. The donated medical supplies and construction materials. Even humans contributed, though they did so anonymously. Humanity allowed this. They even encouraged it. The purpose of the lesson had never been extinction. It had been transformation. Graves, now 73 years old, gave her final address to the United Human Council before retiring. The chamber was full of representatives who had grown up in a galaxy that respected humanity. They had never known the old days of humiliation and contempt. To them, human power was simply a fact of life. Told them to remember that it had not always been this way. She told them about the centuries of patience and the nights she had cried herself to sleep after accepting insults she could not answer. She told them about the weight of the decision to unleash Operation Silence and the faces of the as they watched their empire dissolve. She told them that power was dangerous, not because it corrupted, though it often did, but because it created distance between you and the people you might hurt. She told them that every human leader should visit Harvest IV and see the names on the memorial. Then they should visit the moons and see the people struggling to build new lives. Both of those things were true at the same time. The dead of Harvest IV and the scattered were both consequences of choices made by people who thought they understood power. Told the council that she hoped no species would ever force humanity to remember what it had learned about itself. She hoped the weapons at Threshold would rust in their hangars forever. She hoped her would grow up thinking that the war with the was ancient history, barely worth remembering. But she also told them to maintain the remembrance. She told them to keep watching and waiting and preparing, just as their ancestors had done, because the galaxy was old and full of species who might one day forget the lesson they had learned. And if that day came, humanity would teach it again. Attended's farewell ceremony. He was 57 now, with gray in his hair and old wounds that ached when the weather changed. He had retired from the military years ago and spent his days teaching history to children who had never known fear. After the ceremony, he found sitting alone in a garden outside the council building. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally set down a burden they had carried for too long. He sat beside her and asked if she had any regrets. Thought about it for a while. She told him that she regretted many things. She regretted that patience had not been enough. She regretted that 12,000 people had died on Harvest IV before humanity found the courage to act. She regretted that they had forced her to become something she had never wanted to be. But she did not regret the choice itself. Given the same circumstances, she would make the same decision, because some things were worth protecting, even at terrible cost. Nodded, he told her that he understood. They sat together in silence as the sun set over Geneva. The city lights came on one by one, spreading across the darkness like stars being born. The Galactic Assembly now included a human representative with full voting rights. Treaties were honored. Human ships traveled freely through space that had once been hostile. Children grew up without learning to hide their fear. But in the shadows of dead moons, the weapons of Threshold waited. Human operatives still walked among alien species, watching and listening. The remembrance still grew, recording every slight and every broken promise, just in case. Humanity had learned something about itself during those 7 hours when the Empire fell. They had learned that patience and power were not opposites. They were partners, each making the other possible. The galaxy had learned something too. They had learned that the quiet species in the corner, the ones who smiled at insults and accepted broken treaties, might not be as harmless as they appeared. No species forgot that lesson. And in the centuries that followed, whenever a young diplomat from some ancient civilization thought about mistreating a human, they remembered what had happened to the. They remembered, and they chose differently. That was perhaps the greatest victory of all. Not the fall of an empire, but the rise of understanding. Not the weapons that could crack planets, but the wisdom to keep them holstered. Had said it best in her final address. Humanity had never wanted to be feared. They had only wanted to be respected, and now, finally, they were. The stars watched as humanity took its place among them. They had waited a long time for these patient giants to arrive, and now that they had, the galaxy would never be the same.